Okay, I'm gonna make this plain and simple. For those who has the V8 powered Chevy Trailblazer, GMC Envoy, Saab 97X, Isuzu Ascender, Buick Rainier, GM360s or 370s, if there's all that applied, those that has the four-wheel drive option on these trucks. There's not one video showing how to do the oil pump on these. The dealer probably charges 20 plus hours to do the job. There is no simple solution of doing this. I am not suggesting to do this, but if it wants to save you time and effort, this is for an 04 Envoy XL with the 5.3 LM4 VIN P motor. Common issues, I'm getting low oil pressure at idle, low oil pressure with different altitude changes. So if I'm at a grade, it'll show 40 or less PSI going uphill, and then the lifters will start tapping like crazy. So the common solution is to replace the O-ring, which is that guy down there. This engine has 312,000 miles on it. And since I'm already at the oil pump replacement, I am also going to replace the cam sprocket and camshaft sprocket, and also the chain, because move the flashlight out of the way. Sorry, because the sun's in the way, so I'll try to block it with my hands or my body. But you can see a tremendous amount of slack on this side, so I'm just gonna do that since I'm already here. The book says you have to, and I quote what it says here because I find this amazing, you have to remove the drive axles to the front, which is both front CV axles. You have to unbolt the diff that bolts onto the oil pan. You have to remove the rack and pinion completely out in order to slide the pan out. That is if you want to do everything. If you want to replace the pan gasket, which technically they say you can reuse this, I'm going to just change it because, 300,000 miles, it's showing its wear and tear on it. I kind of damaged the timing cover because the seal that's in front of it didn't want to come off, so part of the inside of it broke, so I got a new one replaced here. To get this pan dropped, I haven't removed the rack and pinion because I just wanted to do the oil pump and the O-ring and just replace the gasket. I'm going to see if I can find a way of doing that, but in order to do that, you got to completely remove the rack and pinion because it's kind of, everything is sandwiched into these trucks. And I mean sandwiched, it is sandwiched. So what I did to get everything completely off, I took, as you can see, everything off from the front, the water pump, the timing cover, the harmonic balancer, all of that was gotten off. The timing cover has, I believe, a few bolts that holds it from the front. So it'll be these two right here. They're 10 millimeters. You can grab it from the bottom. It just slid right out, but I still took all the rest of the bolts off of the pan, literally loosening it up enough that I didn't really require anything to get to this bottom bolt, because how big this pan is from the front, because the front diff bolts onto it and the drive axle goes into it. It's kind of like a tunnel. So for these Envoys, Trailblazers with the four-wheel drives, even the Trailblazer SS, it could be the same setup, that if you just drop the pan, most of all the bolts completely out, you will have enough clearance that you can actually grab the bolt just from the top and grab it by hand, and everything should just come out easy. I know on the Tahoes and the bigger trucks that you got to finger it in with a fish wire and all this stuff. It's not that hard on the Trailblazer, surprisingly, in the Envoys. There's that enough space in this pan, that deep, that you can throw your whole hand in there. And look, I can throw my whole hand in there. And I undid the bolt with a wrench, and I just unscrewed it by hand. So it is not that bad as I thought it's supposed to be. So, like I said, there's no videos on how to do these V8s in these Envoys or Trailblazers, because nobody apparently has done it. The ones I've seen so far has been the 2-wheel drive versions. So as you can see, lots of room to do it on this truck. And unfortunately for my half, this truck was missing a few bolts for the diff, so the diff came out a lot easier than expected. I just put it to the side, so that gave me room to go under and sandwich it in, and with a 10mm socket and extensions, actually grabbed the oil pan bolts and brought them all down. Now there's a few bolts that gets a lot of people trapped. Is the pan is also bolted to the transmission. So there should be one bolt here, one bolt there. There's 2 bolts that goes underneath it here. And then there's more back bolts hiding, and I mean hiding, for the pan here. And also on the right side as well, next to the starter. So you're gonna have to loosen your starter completely out to get it. And the pan also has a trick to it in the front, that you have to remove the AC compressor bolts that holds it to the pan. You don't need to remove the compressor completely out. I learned the trick that there's 2 bolts that actually holds the AC compressor to the pan, which is kind of hard, but not so hard. You can see it. There's one there, and you do not have to remove the strut assembly to get to those other bolts, because I managed, once you remove the CV axle and the axle disconnect, you literally have more room to take the pan bolts off from this side. It wasn't much of a bear, because the axle disconnect actually has hidden bolts, so don't pry it off. It should just come off on its own. There's hidden bolts around here. You just have to wiggle the harness and cooler lines. So what my trick was for the cooler lines, without to lose any fluid, I took it off from the radiator and just have a hose on both ends, so it doesn't lose much fluid. You'll probably lose a little bit of fluid coming out of the cooler itself, but not much. But there's 3 bolts to that compressor that I took out. The 4th one's actually on the block. That's the one you have to remove the spindle. The axle assembly completely out. You might have to move the motor mount to get that last bolt out. But like I said, you do not need to remove that bolt off. There's 1 bolt here on top, and there's 2 bolts right there. I just left the other one in there because you don't need to pull everything out. And then the pan just completely dropped. So like I said, I don't recommend what I'm doing right now, because I'm technically having a fiasco. But as you can see, the V8 Envoys and Trailblazers, it's a lot easier to work on because the pan is fat from the front. So trick is, save time and effort, take both CV axles out, remove the axle disconnect assembly. I couldn't disconnect the actuator itself because it's it's in there, so I left it in there plugged in. But there's the axle disconnect. There's the other end to it. And then this is what's left of the oil pump I took off. I'm putting a mailing unit into it. Seeing everybody does that. So that's all the new stuff I got there. So I have the chain inside of a synthetic oil. I'm gonna prime the mailing pump by, I'm gonna have it upside down. I'm just gonna attach this bad boy and just get going onto it. And for the timing marks, there's a little notch here on the crank sprocket, and there's one here for the cam. You have to really make sure that this engine's at top dead center, because it may look like it is at top dead center, but remember there's 180 degrees of difference. So if you do put it in backwards, that intake valve or exhaust valve could be fully open, and then if you crank this thing over, you're going to do damage. So make sure when you take these off, there's a marking on this and there's a marking on that. You have to make sure that they're both facing, the crank's showing at 12, the cam should be at 6 o'clock, and that's where it's supposed to be. And then when you put the new, once you put the new mailing stuff in, you should also do the same. 12 crank, 6 cam. I would have shown the entire video of how to do this whole job, but this is a 20-hour job on the books. And to do the water pump on these trucks, it says it might be 2 or 3 hours, but it's a GM water pump. Those pumps are technically relatively easy. Any mechanic can get it out within 20 minutes of just having the antifreeze draining, taking the fan clutch off, and then there's 6 bolts that holds it in, and it comes right off. And the timing cover has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I believe the cover has about 10 bolts, 8 on the cover and 2 holding at the bottom of the pan. So this is not that bad. I'm not great at doing videos, but as you can see, I'm probably the first that actually shows how to do this, and hopefully it is not so bad. If you want to do this on your own, you're looking about, I mean, it took me roughly almost 8+ hours just to get everything off, taking the bolts off, the diff, the axles. I'm in a very uncomfortable spot because the garage is angled. I don't have the greatest of jacks, but I mean, it is what it is. But I thought this was going to be a pain in the butt, and especially with this bolt for the oil pump. It just came right off and didn't fall in the pan, because look how much space you have to do it. So this is my video. So if any suggestions or tricks, or you want to value your opinion, greatly appreciate it. But as you can see, it is not so bad.